saying that his Russian counterpart was directly behind the hackings that Democrats insist contributed to Hillary Clinton's defeat. It was the dominant topic in the president's end-of-the-year news conference before leaving for vacation in Hawaii. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen was there and reports tonight live from the White House briefing room. Good evening, James.
Bret, good evening. This appears to be the first time that President Obama himself has attributed both major hacks in this political cycle of the Democratic National Committee and of Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta to the Kremlin. And the president was hardly subtle in imputing to Vladimir Putin direct culpability in those operations. Appearing unfazed by the latest allegations from the White House, Russian President Vladimir Putin wrapped up 2 days of talks in Tokyo with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe aimed at expanding economic ties. Back in Moscow, the Kremlin challenged President Obama to put his money where his mouth has been on claims that Russia hacked the email accounts of the Democratic National Committee and Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta to tilt the 2016 election to Donald Trump. They should either stop talking about that or produce some proof at last, said Putin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, adding, otherwise it all begins to look unseemly. At his year-end news conference, President Obama said the administration will release a report, albeit a rather incomplete one, outlining the underlying intelligence before Mr. Trump is sworn in.
The intelligence that I've seen gives me great confidence in their assessment that the Russians carried out this hack. The hack of the DNC and the hack of John Podesta. But I'll be honest with you, when you're talking about cybersecurity, a lot of it is classified, and we're not going to provide it.
Earlier, Mr. Obama vowed to NPR, not for the first time, to retaliate against Russia in a quote-unquote proportionate way.
We need to take action, and we will, at a time and place of our own choosing. Some of it may be explicit and publicized. Some of it may not be. But Mr. Putin is well aware of my feelings about this because I spoke to him directly about it.
While his administration has rebuffed a request from House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes for a briefing on the claims of Russian cyber meddling, President Obama referred to an assessment to that effect reached by the Central Intelligence Agency. At his news conference, Mr. Obama implied that that assessment is, quote, uniform across all 17 of the nation's spy agencies.
Unless the American people genuinely think that the professionals in the CIA, the FBI, our entire intelligence infrastructure are less trustworthy than the Russians, then people should pay attention to what our intelligence agencies say.
Mr. Obama stopped short of directly accusing President Putin of orchestrating the hack attacks, but left little doubt of the view from the White House.
And I will let you make that determination as to whether there are high-level Russian officials who go off rogue and decide to tamper with the U.S. election process without Vladimir Putin knowing about it.
And the president defended his actions in the thick of the campaign when, according to him, the White House disclosed Russia's involvement but otherwise sought to avoid the appearance of law enforcement agencies intervening on Hillary Clinton's behalf.
And part of the goal here was to make sure that we did not do the work of the leakers for them by raising more and more questions about the integrity of the election right before the election was taking place.
Tonight, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Devin Nunes of California, a Republican, rebuffed in that request for a special briefing on these claims for his committee, said in a statement, and I quote, "I am alarmed that supposedly new information continues to leak to the media, but has not been provided to Congress." Bret?
James, I know this was the president's last press conference of the year, but was it his last press conference?
I asked him that as he was leaving the room, and he said with a smile that he enjoyed this and he'll have to think about that.
We'll see. James Rosen at the White House. James, thank you. President-elect Donald Trump and his team continue to downplay the theory that Russian interference helped him win the election. Senior national correspondent John Roberts is following that story from New York.
Donald Trump left New York today, headed to warmer climes in Florida, having turned up the heat on the political battle over suspected Russian hacking. Trump tweeting this morning, quote, "Are we talking about the same cyber attack where it was revealed the head of the DNC illegally gave Hillary the questions to the debate?" And after White House spokesman Josh Earnest directly implicated Trump in the hack of Democratic organizations,
Mr. Trump obviously knew that Russia was engaged in malicious cyber activity that was helping him and hurting Secretary Clinton's campaign.
Trump let the press secretary have it with both barrels at a Hershey, Pennsylvania rally.
This foolish guy, Josh Earnest, I don't know if he's talking to President Obama. You know, having the right press secretary is so important.
At his press conference today, President Obama was far more measured in describing his conversations with Trump a few days ago about the need to investigate what Russia did and didn't do.
My hope is that the president-elect is going to similarly be concerned with making sure that we don't have potential foreign influence in our election process.
While she didn't implicate Trump, Hillary Clinton did tell a group of donors last night that Vladimir Putin was trying to hurt her candidacy as payback for her 2011 declaration that the Russian presidential election was rigged.
Putin publicly blamed me for the outpouring of outrage by his own people. And that is the direct line between what he said back then and what he did in this election.
Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway today scoffed at the idea that Putin helped determine the outcome of the election, saying Clinton was a victim of an arrogant campaign that never considered the possibility she might actually lose.
Vladimir Putin didn't tell Hillary Clinton to ignore Wisconsin and Michigan.
Clinton has previously said that the FBI director helped torpedo her campaign, a charge her former campaign chairman doubled down on today. In an op-ed, John Podesta writing, quote, comparing the FBI's massive response to the overblown email scandal with the seemingly lackadaisical response to the very real Russian plot to subvert a national election shows that something is deeply broken at the FBI. Outgoing Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid minced no words, declaring Comey had interfered with the election.
He became such a partisan that he should become the new chair of the RNC. Okay?
The Trump transition insists this is all just merely an attempt to delegitimize Trump's presidency and hamper his ability to get his agenda through when he takes office. But there's an important milestone coming up on Monday. That's when the electors get together to vote. And if that proceeds as it should, it would likely clear away a lot of the cloud of criticism that seems to be hampering Trump's ability to put together a governing team. Bret? John Roberts, live outside Trump Tower. John, thank you. About a dozen presidential chiefs of staff dating back to the Carter administration got together today for lunch with the man soon to be the newest member of that fraternity. Incoming Trump chief of staff Reince Priebus was the guest of honor. The luncheon was hosted by current White House chief of staff Dennis McDonough. The timing could not be much better for our next report in our series previewing the first 100 days of the Donald Trump presidency. Tonight, correspondent Kevin Cork on U.S. relations with Russia.
He's considered by most who follow the game to be the greatest chess player of all time. But in many ways, chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov is also the very embodiment of the vestiges of the Cold War between the United States and the former Soviet Union.
Yes, I had to leave my country due to political reasons.
The Russian national may live in New York City, but in his role as chairman for the Human Rights Foundation, he keeps a watchful eye on Moscow.
I have to say that, I couldn't expect things to get worse after 8 years of Obama. But now we are we're entering sort of new territory, uncharted waters.
A sobering assessment that comes after watching the gulf between Washington and Moscow expand over the past 8 years, a span that's seen Moscow's unlawful incursion into Ukraine, its bombing of rebels in Syria, and unprofessional treatment of American military assets both in the air and at sea. It's all a reflection, says Kasparov, of Russian President Vladimir Putin, a man whose ruthless pursuit of Russia's romanticized past will continue no matter who's in power in Washington.
It's very hard to explain to anyone who was born and raised in a free country like the United States. It's a one-man dictatorship where you have no rights. And unless you're loyal to the regime, you're on your own, and there's no guarantee, for your security, for your well-being, for your family, and and even for your life.
Though the Obama administration has worked with the Russians on a number of initiatives, including the Iran nuclear deal and Paris Climate Accord, major differences obviously remain. Differences further exacerbated by the recent allegations that Russian hacking disrupted the run-up to the U.S. election in November.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually get along with Russia? Wouldn't that be a decent thing? Wouldn't that be nice?
If there is an interest in improving relations with Russia, he has to decide what that's for. What is he trying to accomplish? What does he want from the Russians?
President-elect Trump's sentiment that the Russians can be accommodating flies in the face of convention here in Washington, though his outreach has been received with surprising optimism at the Kremlin.
It is well known, widely known, that the President-elect of the United States is publicly in favor of a normalization of Russia-U.S. relations. We cannot not support this. We are, of course, in favor of this.
Still, analysts warn not to read too much into what many perceive could be a thawing of relations. Because, say analysts, that's not how leaders in Russia think.
Where the U.S. took a step forward, the Russians have seen a threat. Where the U.S. took a step back, the Russians saw weakness. Because the Russians see it as a zero-sum game, as a competition with the United States.
A high-stakes competition with the very fate of the world resting in the hands of a political novice who has repeatedly defied both convention and the odds. Perhaps the biggest issue facing the incoming Trump administration is how best to navigate the complicated relationship between Washington and Moscow. And once again, the consideration becomes, will it be adversarial or ultimately advantageous? Bret?
Kevin Cork on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. We are 10 reports through our 15-part series looking ahead to the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. Monday, we focus on the incoming administration's education policy. You can watch all parts of our series on our show homepage, foxnews.com/special report. President Obama says the Bashar al-Assad regime cannot slaughter its way to legitimacy in Syria. The president is calling for an impartial observer force in Aleppo. The evacuation of eastern Aleppo stalled today after eruption of gunfire there. Both sides accuse the other of starting it. And while buses filled with people were able to leave the city yesterday, experts say more than 40,000 civilians remain. Correspondent John Huddy has the latest tonight from our Middle East newsroom.
They were overcome with emotion. Two men separated in eastern Aleppo were reunited. They were among the thousands who made it out alive. But just as the evacuation of other civilians this morning seemed to be gaining speed, it came to a halt. Syria's military says rebel fighters opened fire at civilian convoys leaving eastern Aleppo. Turkish officials and rebel commanders blame pro-government forces, in particular Iranian militias allied with Bashar al-Assad's regime. So far, about 8,000 civilians have been evacuated from eastern Aleppo, but thousands more remain trapped, according to various aid groups. Russian military officials said today that most rebel fighters have left eastern Aleppo.
We think that the withdrawal of armed groups from Aleppo and the end of the operation to liberate the city of all the necessary conditions for peace settlement of the conflict in Syria have been created.
Tonight, President Obama said that Syria, Russia, and Iran have blood on their hands for the slaughter of innocent civilians in Aleppo.
The world, as we speak, is united in horror at the savage assaults by the Syrian regime and its Russian and Iranian allies on the city of Aleppo.
For those who have escaped the savage assault, their future remains uncertain.
In God willing, we will return to Aleppo. The blood of the martyrs will not go to waste. The blood of the children and those who are wounded will not go to waste. The war is not over.
While the end of the battle for Aleppo has renewed calls for peace talks, it does not mean the end of the civil war, with both rebel fighters and regime forces vowing to continue fighting. And as the fight against ISIS also continues, President Obama added tonight that the situation in Syria remains one of the hardest issues he's had to deal with in his presidency. Bret?
John Huddy in our Middle East newsroom. John, thank you. Russia and Syria are not the only countries challenging President Obama in his final days in office. China has brazenly stolen a piece of American technology from right under the Navy's nose. Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson is at the Pentagon tonight to tell us about it. Good evening, Lucas.
Good evening, Bret. Defense officials tell Fox News that the crew of a U.S. Navy-owned research vessel watched from a mere quarter-mile away as a Chinese Navy ship brazenly stole an underwater oceanographic research drone in the South China Sea. The incident occurred Thursday afternoon, approximately 40 miles west of the Philippines in international waters. One China expert said the communist country must pay a price for its actions.
This is an act of war because the Chinese have seized U.S. naval property.
The Pentagon is demanding the Chinese return the underwater vehicle immediately. Officials say there is no classified material in the system designed to map the sea floor and collect ocean data. The Chinese ship had been shadowing USNS Bowditch, operated by a crew of civilian mariners and scientists. The American ship was not armed, but made repeated requests over the radio asking the Chinese to return the drone. The State Department today launched a formal protest. In the past few days, China has conducted its first live-fire training exercise from its only aircraft carrier off the coast between Beijing and North Korea. Late last week, for the first time since President-elect Donald Trump's call with the president of Taiwan, China flew a long-range H-6 bomber around the South China Sea. The Chinese had not flown that route since March 2015. And Chinese state media said today the country is ready to take Taiwan by force if the U.S. doesn't recognize it's part of China. The current commander-in-chief cautioned his successor today that China sees Taiwan as an existential threat.
This goes to the core of how they see themselves. And their reaction on this issue could end up being very significant.
And Bret, a short time ago, I was just handed the official Chinese response to the State Department's protest known as a démarche. A Chinese official responded, quote, "You know that China has undisputed sovereignty of the South China Sea. There are risks from your continued close-in surveillance. Keep in mind, Bret, the South China Sea is international waters, but it does appear that tensions are ratcheting up." Bret?
Lucas Tomlinson live at the Pentagon. Lucas, thank you. One of the challenges to the incoming administration with its unconventional president-elect will be dealing with unconventional warfare. Tonight, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge reports there's a lot of gray area in what used to be the black and white business of war.
These guys they're sort of the shadow warriors.
Deep inside the Pentagon in this secure facility, the top civilian official for special operations and low-intensity warfare, Teresa Whalen, is getting the morning brief.
So what do we got?
Whalen's message to the next administration: technology is leveling the battlefield for terrorist groups and nation states like Russia.
What is the gray zone? The blurring of the space between peace and war.
What's the operational tempo?
It's incredibly high.
Fox News went behind the scenes with Whalen, who is the first woman to hold the job at a time when the command says 7,500 special operations forces are deployed to 97 countries.
Have you met with the transition team?
Yes, I have. My recommendation is always try to take as clear-eyed a look at the situation as we can, and assess the risks.
Like the Russian-backed cyber militias, who U.S. officials say interfered with the 2016 election cycle.
If you look back over the last, say, decade or two, I think you can see a general trend in Russia being more aggressive.
ISIS also uses information warfare to recruit. This week, confirmation that 2 operatives behind the November 2015 Paris massacre were dead in the so-called Caliphate capital.
Our coalition is relentlessly reaching into Raqqa to eliminate ISIL leaders, with a particular focus on those planning and plotting against our homeland and our partners.
The mission goes beyond targeting. In Mosul, they are training and advising Iraqi troops.
That's the only way that the victory is sustained. I mean, you have to have skin in the game. You have to own it.
But it comes at a price. In Iraq, 5 Americans have been killed. Whalen says the current military leadership has made the preservation of the forces and the family a priority. And the next administration will also rely on these quiet warriors. In Washington, Catherine Herridge, Fox News.
Up next, why are churches providing places to hide for illegal immigrants? We'll have that story, but first, what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in San Francisco has crews battle a fire at an auto junkyard in Richmond, California. Officials say a car within a pile of vehicles caught fire, and then the wind spread the flames to other cars. The county issued a shelter-in-place warning for residents that has since been lifted. Fox 5 in New York as federal rail regulators endorse a $120 billion plan to rebuild the congested Northeast Corridor. The 30-year project would shore up crumbling infrastructure, expand service, and speed up travel. And this is a live look inside the Ohio Capitol in Columbus from our affiliate Fox 28. The big story there tonight, the body of former astronaut and Senator John Glenn lies in state. A public viewing began today at noon. It is part of a series of events celebrating Glenn's life. Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. He died last week at 95 years old. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Congressional Republicans have quietly closed a year-long investigation into the Flint, Michigan drinking water crisis. The House Oversight Committee says state officials and the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, did not detect the problem soon enough or take proper action. The senior Democrat on the panel is accusing Michigan's Republican governor of stonewalling the committee regarding documents related to the crisis. This afternoon, President Obama signed a bill authorizing nearly $200 million for communities facing drinking water emergencies, including Flint. Some of Donald Trump's harshest and most successful campaign rhetoric had to do with immigration and what to do with people in this country illegally. And that has many of those people very worried. Tonight, religion correspondent Lauren Green tells us how the faith community is reaching out.
As the world watched Donald Trump win the presidency, Philadelphia resident Gloria said for the first time since fleeing Venezuela and coming to America, she began to fear that she might be deported. She and her husband and 2 of their 4 children are here illegally after overstaying a 6-month visa 25 years ago.
We all cried that night. We feel very insecure. We feel as though everything has fallen from our hands. Everything.
Now she looks to the churches for help. Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric about building walls and deporting millions of illegal immigrants has caused a huge uptick in the new sanctuary movement. Some 450 churches from Boston to California have joined forces to become a stopgap between an unknown future under a Trump administration for millions like Gloria, offering legal aid and in some cases a place to stay.
Matthew 25 talks about, when Jesus is talking about judging the nations, one of the things they say they'll judge nations upon is welcoming the stranger.
Since the election, Trump has softened his rhetoric.
We're going to make a determination on the people that you're talking about who are terrific people.
Trump's take reflects the clarified position of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, in the wake of the new sanctuary movement, saying it will not enter sensitive locations like churches and schools to arrest an illegal. Arch Street Methodist in Philadelphia is now giving sanctuary to Javier Flores, a father of 3 U.S.-born children. He's been deported several times, but returned. Some opposed say churches have wrongly interpreted their mandate to give sanctuary.
What the churches want to do is actually, in providing sanctuary, defeat the American system of justice, the American system of laws that these churches benefit from, and say they are above the law.
The sanctuary movement is somewhat hopeful that the president-elect's campaign talk is just that. But in the meantime, they are putting their faith in what they believe are the demands of a higher power. Bret?
Lauren, thank you. Another of candidate Donald Trump's big promises, saving the coal industry. After years of what critics called President Obama's war on coal, there are real questions whether the next president can pull it off. Correspondent Brian Yennis has that story tonight from the heart of Pennsylvania coal country.
We are going to put our miners back to work.
President-elect Trump repeated a campaign promise Thursday that helped him win almost 70% of the vote in Greene County in southwestern Pennsylvania. The state's highest producing coal county has lost more than a third of its coal jobs since 2012, according to federal labor statistics.
I've never voted so strongly for someone in my life, ever. I took it personally. This is my job.
Jim Poplarchek is a lifelong Democrat and miner. His family is 4 generations of miners. He believes Trump will stop things from getting worse.
He said he's going to try, and you can't fault a man for trying. The ones who've lost their jobs, I'd say it might be a hard time to get them back. But I think the ones who are still working, we might have a future.
The Emerald Mine behind me has served as a beacon for this coal community for nearly 40 years. Last month, it shut down, slashing 500 jobs. Experts say it's doubtful the coal industry will bounce back because simply cutting back environmental regulations is not enough.
He's not going to be able to bring those jobs back, and it's not a promise he's going to be able to keep. The headwinds aligned against are lower cost natural gas, it's lower cost renewables, and it's international concerns about climate change.
But the natural gas industry has the potential to revitalize struggling coal communities. Gas discovered in the Marcellus Shale in 2007 has created over 50,000 direct jobs in Pennsylvania.
This is a multi-generational play. This is no flash in the pan. I say we're in the first inning of a 9-inning game.
The industry says it needs infrastructure to move an oversupply of gas to more markets. That investment could create lasting jobs.
We're encouraged by the fact that under a Trump administration, the free marketplace will work and we'll have the opportunity to produce all our energy sources.
Natural gas is not without controversy. It's extracted by fracking, which the Environmental Protection Agency says could contaminate drinking water in certain circumstances. Brian Yennis, Fox News.
A down day for the markets to end the week. The Dow was off 9, the S&P 500 lost 4, the Nasdaq fell 20. For the week, the Dow was up almost a half percentage point. The S&P 500 was down a fraction. The Nasdaq lost 0.0015 of a point. A real power struggle is going on tonight in North Carolina. The outgoing Republican governor has signed into law a bill Democrats say is part of an ongoing effort by GOP lawmakers to limit the authority of the incoming Democratic governor. Republicans say they're just adjusting their constitutional powers. Correspondent Jonathan Sari shows us what's happening.
Sergeant Arms will clear the gallery. Police escorted protesters from the North Carolina House chamber. Demonstrations erupted after the Republican-controlled legislature followed a special session on hurricane and wildfire relief with a new session to limit the governor's powers to appoint cabinet members and reduce the number of state employees he can hire and fire.
It has all the appearance of a vendetta against a newly elected governor.
Critics call the legislation a power grab because Republicans are passing it just after Democrat Roy Cooper narrowly defeated Pat McCrory, the GOP incumbent. But Republicans insist they're just restoring the balance of power between the state's legislative and executive branches.
I can't think of a more timely approach than in the peaceful transfer of power during our election and after our election.
North Carolina, the legislature has the dominant power. The legislature gives power to the governor in many ways. The legislature takes power away from the governor in many ways. And so in some ways, what you're seeing happen here this month is a continuation of ordinary practice in North Carolina.
Governor-elect Cooper accused Republican lawmakers of trying to thwart his agenda on education, health care, and the environment.
The way they're doing that is with these laws that move people into positions who are going to be making those decisions. And I don't think the people of North Carolina want that.
One of the big X factors at play right here is what is public backlash going to be? There's obviously a lot of Democrats who are unhappy with how things are going in North Carolina right now.
Some Democratic lawmakers say this 11th hour legislation goes beyond politics and violates the state constitution. Governor-elect Cooper says he's prepared to challenge Republicans in court if he believes their actions are harming North Carolinians. Bret?
Jonathan, thank you. The company that makes an expensive emergency allergy treatment used by many people is coming out with a generic version at half price. Mylan has been heavily criticized for more than a 500% increase in the price of its EpiPen product since 2007. So a new and cheaper alternative will hit stores next week. A 2-injection pack will cost $300. President Obama insists Russia was behind hacking that interfered with the election. We'll talk about that and what else he said during today's news conference when the panel joins me after a break.
You can't predict the market.
I can assure the public that there was not the kind of tampering with the voting process that was a concern in early September when I saw President Putin in China. I felt that the most effective way to ensure that that didn't happen was to talk to him directly and tell him to cut it out, and there were going to be some serious consequences if he didn't. Over a third of Republican voters approve of Vladimir Putin, the former head of the KGB. Ronald Reagan would roll over in his grave. I'm finding it a little curious that everybody's suddenly acting surprised that this looked like it was disadvantaging Hillary Clinton, because you guys wrote about it every day. I don't think she was treated fairly during the election.
President Obama, today's last news conference of the year, saying that the Russians did hack into the DNC and into John Podesta's emails to try to tilt the election toward Donald Trump. As you heard, he said it didn't affect the actual voting process, but it did try to interfere with the election. The Trump team has not responded to the news conference since then, but earlier in the day, Donald Trump tweeted out, "Are we talking about the same cyber attack where it was revealed that the head of the DNC illegally gave Hillary the questions to the debate?" Also tweeting, we all did it together. I hope the movement fans will go to D.C. on January 20th for the swearing in. Let's set the all-time record." Talking, of course, about the inauguration. Let's bring in our panel, syndicated columnist George Will, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill. George, the news conference, what you took from it, it was rather lengthy.
His long opening statement was quite interesting because he raised this question of the danger of a cyber war arms race and the need for international norms, and he made a threat. He really said that we're in, to use the Cold War analogy, we're in now a period of mutual assured destruction, because what they did to us, we can do to them. Earlier in the show tonight, we had that woman in the Pentagon talking about the gray space between war and peace. The United States, using the Stuxnet virus, damaged the physical infrastructure, the centrifuges of the Iranian nuclear program. That is a gray area that looks an awful lot like sort of an act of war. Now, in the president's statement, he said, we're going to try and publicize what happened, but we have to protect sources and methods by keeping some things secret. I hope there's not a lot to be kept secret, because as Pat Moynihan said in an excellent book on the subject of secrecy, secrecy is government regulation. Most regulations regulate what we can do. This regulates what we can know. And it seems to me very important that we know what happened here.
A.B., what did you take away from it? Obviously spent most of the news conference talking about the hacking and Russia.
Well, I was really struck by his comments on Syria and how the blood and atrocities in Syria, the butchering by Assad of his own people, are on the hands of the Russians and the Iranians. And
Let me play a piece of that and we'll come back.
There are places around the world where horrible things are happening, and because of my office, because I'm President of the United States, I feel responsible. I ask myself every single day, is there something I could do that would save lives and make a difference? With respect to Syria, what I have consistently done is taken the best course that I can to try to end the civil war, while having also to take into account the long-term national security interests of the United States.
Maybe.
I just thought it was very poignant to hear President Obama use phrases like, we were not successful and I feel responsible. I mean, he, regardless of what you think of when he didn't intervene and how he didn't intervene, there are no easy choices. And he essentially said, without invading Syria, and leaving that country with our own blood and treasure to a moderate opposition that isn't even, he said, cohesive enough to govern afterwards in place of the regime, we couldn't do it. It would ask too much of Americans to go and kind of rescue Syria. And when he talked about Donald Trump's, supposed policy on safe zones, it was a very painful discussion of how there are no options. Even for Donald Trump, a safe zone is not possible. There won't be the permission of the Russians or the Iranians or the Syrians. You'd have to go in and protect territory.
But his inaction at the beginning, his choice not to make a choice, created the spiraling lack of choices later on.
Right. I just was struck that he was so heavy with responsibility, and it was very painful for him. And it set up for all of us going forward the lack of choices there are at this point, and how much Donald Trump will be boxed in trying to get out of the mess in Syria.
Now, what about, back to the Russia part, what about the whole thing that the transition was going smoothly? They talk all the time. This has been a different sounding White House on this issue specifically.
Yeah, for sure. I am struck by that. It's strange to see a White House press secretary taking on the incoming president. Usually that type of talk might happen behind the scenes, but you don't see it so up front, so front and center. And look, this is a country that we're kind of at each other's throats politically. There's no question about it. And when you can't agree on basics like this, and when a lot of people like myself who voted for Donald Trump look at this and say, okay, why does this seem like we're politicizing very basic questions? And why are we talking about this, about the fact that Hillary Clinton only lost because of something like this? It seems like a mistake for them to go down that path. And I don't think it gets us to a better place as a country, and it doesn't build bipartisanship around these big questions of Russia and China and those threats that we have around the globe.
Well, speaking of that, the different views, Hillary Clinton out on a thank you tour last night, and Kellyanne Conway speaking.
Vladimir Putin himself directed the covert cyber attacks against our electoral system, against our democracy, apparently because he has a personal beef against me. He is determined not only to, score a point against me, which he did, but also to undermine our democracy.
Vladimir Putin didn't tell Hillary Clinton to ignore Wisconsin and Michigan. So all of this idea, this lack of self-awareness now is seeping into an argument about our intelligence, and that we don't appreciate.
George.
Well, Putin is having a very good December, because simultaneously he picked a side in Syria and he won. His side is won and the war is over. And here at home, leave aside the question of what the intent of the Russians was in getting into this, and leave aside the question, which is unanswerable at this point anyway, did it have an effect? The fact is it has had one effect that Putin must be pleased about, and that is it has Americans, as you say, at one another's throat even more than usual. So by sowing discord and sowing doubts in the minds of maybe 30 or 40% of Americans about some taint of illegitimacy in the result of this election, it's a huge victory for Putin.
I want to play one more soundbite, and that is President Obama on the state of the Democratic Party.
It is not something I've been able to transfer to candidates in midterms and sort of build a sustaining organization around. That's something that I would have liked to have done more of, but it's kind of hard to do when you're also dealing with a whole bunch of issues here in the White House.
So AB, shortened, I could do it, but I couldn't give it to anybody else.
Yeah, I was really struck by President Obama's comments today, not only on what he did for the country and the world, everything is great. And it made me think of when Trump leaves office in his last press conference, because everything will be great. He basically said he could prove it to the American people. Everything is better. That's what Obama said. And when it came to the Democrats, he didn't really take any blame. There was implicit criticism aimed at Hillary Clinton in his comments about how he had built a galvanized, a broader coalition, brought out low propensity voters who usually don't get into the system, and he had actually been in touch more with working class Americans, and obviously he did. He won them, then Trump won them, and she lost them. But it was a really interesting. It was an interesting way of sort of trying to kind of hit her and say it's not my fault that she lost.
There has been this evolution, Matt, about how he perceives this election and why it happened. I mean, he says that by every measure, our country is stronger, more prosperous, more respected today around the world. I don't know. Do the people in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and those states think that way?
We often talk about the bubble. And I think today's press conference really demonstrated the bubble, which is presidents tend to live in bubbles. And I think presidents get told great things in the Oval Office. It's hard to tell the president the straight dope in the Oval Office. And I don't think he's hearing very much of it. And talk about a lonely victory. Yes, he has had great victories as president. But the Democratic Party and the donkey has never lost so much in the history of that party. They have lost from the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot all over the country.
2/3 state legislatures, the Senate, the House, 34 governors?
Outside of Washington, and soon inside of Washington, but outside of Washington, the Democratic Party will be weaker than it has been since the 1920s, or arguably since Reconstruction in the 1870s.
Next up, the Friday lightning round.
China's increasing role in international affairs. There's probably no bilateral relationship that carries more significance. There's also the potential, if that relationship breaks down or goes into a full conflict mode, that everybody is worse off.
The president should get in front of the podium, look into the camera, and say that the United States will use all elements of its power to obtain the return of this drone. And if the Chinese don't send it back immediately, we need to start to impose costs on China.
Well, very close to the South China Sea, a Chinese naval vessel stole an underwater drone used by the U.S. Navy. It was witnessed while it was taken from the water and taken from the U.S. The USNS Bowditch was right there. And the underwater drone is now in the possession of the Chinese. A big incident. We're back with the panel on the Friday Lightning Round. Matt.
This is the tip of the iceberg. This, I think, as Gordon said, is an act of war. And I think it's really, President Trump hasn't taken the oath yet, but it's really going to be a test, an early test for his administration. But China takes billions of dollars of our intellectual property every year. They are a thief of a huge magnitude, and they have a big impact on our economy. They take these things, they copycat the technology. They are active in stealing every day, and it's time for us to get serious about it.
Yeah, I don't think that President Obama is going to do anything about this in his remaining 32 days or whatever it is. He hasn't been aggressive enough about what they're doing in the South China Seas, but if you couple the tension with Trump and the Chinese, you couple what happened is what's going on with the drone with the fact that they're announcing proudly that they've installed weapon systems on their islands that they've built up in the South China Seas. This is really going to be an early test for Trump. George?
Yes, the islands are 40 miles from the Philippines, which has close relations with our country. The United States Navy exists to guarantee for the world freedom of the seas, and it's going to have to be used in that purpose. There's only one place in the world, it seems to me, that really has a Sarajevo potential to really spark a big conflict, and it's the most dangerous place in the world right now, and it's the South China Sea.
Incoming Democratic governor in North Carolina is not happy with what Republicans are trying to do in his state.
This has got to stop. If I believe that laws passed by the legislature hurt working families and are unconstitutional, they will see me in court. And they don't have a very good track record there.
Tell me what you want, what you really want. Justice! Tell me what you need, what you really need. Justice!
So, some chants, some protests, North Carolina. George, what about this? Governor-elect Cooper, does he have a case here?
I think he does. This is all part of the scorched earth politics, that another step on the downward path toward a banana republic status. By all means, fight in elections, win. If you win, you get to work your will. But to change the powers of a constitutional office because of the party membership of the next occupant of it is unpleasant.
Maybe.
I hate partisanship, and I agree with George. It's completely scorched earth, and I hope there's a backlash.
Matt.
I love partisanship, but I agree with George. I think this is over the line. When you lose, shake the other guy's hand, go home.
Winners and losers. Winner first.
Winner, the oil patch. Rick Perry, A.G. Pruitt from Oklahoma, Rex Tillerson. We're addicted to oil again, baby, and it's back.
SUVs, maybe winners?
Right.
I don't know. All right, loser.
Loser would be the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, and they see President Obama putting up his dukes to Russia and to Putin. I think they might want their prize back.
AV, winner then loser.
Okay, my winner is Vladimir Putin, and George Will took the entire paragraph out of my mouth. He is having Christmas early. He has a president who stood up today talking about how, with high confidence, we now know uniform intelligence assessments confirm that the highest levels of Russian government was involved in tampering with the election. We have an incoming president that dismisses it. This could not be better for Vladimir Putin. And my loser is this guy or woman. It could have happened nowhere but Florida. In this heavy-set white man or woman, unnamed, held up the Holiday gas station on U.S. Route 19 with a drawn-on beard. And actually, if they don't catch him or her, it might be my winner coming January.
It's pretty good. Sneaky. Sharpies. All right, George, winner and then loser.
The winners are the rats of Paris, who have the run of the place now, because the European Union, which can make everything worse, has decided that the old way of poisoning the rats won't do, and they mandated a new one, and the rats won't cooperate. So the loser of the week is the bartender at the Trump Grill in the new Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yes.
A Daily Beast reporter was at that bar when someone ordered a vodka martini, and it was served in that glass, which should be a flogging offense.
That's a vodka martini iced tea, I think.
That is not how you make America great again.
Somebody got fired.
That's not how you make a martini great again. All right, panel, thank you. Straight ahead,